So I just want to start by thanking both Jon, you and Temitope for taking the time to chat with us at the Christian Beat today. And we'll focus on Symphony of Peace, but we'll see where else the conversation takes us as we go.
Nice.
So first, I guess I just want to start talking about that piece, that project in particular. From what I've read about it, it wasn't a plan that you weren't planning on coming out of the recording session or the writing session with this piece. So I'm curious, kind of, if you want to just take us through a little bit of how that came to be and how it started.
No doubt. Maybe I'll jump in a little bit, and then I'd love Temitope to dive in. But in general, you either just try to create stuff and get stuff off your chest, or you try to walk in step with the master artist. And more, I'm trying to lean into that, but it is remarkable. We try to be so strategic, and it is amazing how strategic God is, should we give him the space to do so. And that's not religious platitudes. Like, that's either for real or it's not. Especially, I was in a season last year where it was incredibly costly in my own personal life, and yet then I step into. I started a work called Psalmist Mission. We train and disciple worship leaders out of California to be psalmists on. Our producer, and praying into another work or creating some more music out of that. And he's like, man, I was praying, and you're going to be in this time. I want to connect you with my bro, Temitope. So I'm like, I trust Sam. And, I love folks in general. People really matter to me. But as far as collabing with folks, being kindred is really important to me. But I trust Sam. So we step into this studio session, and I'm like, hey, bro, Temitope, what's up, man? Great to meet you. And, I've always kind of been the like soul chocolate brother anyway. So I'm loving, this ethnic kindredness already. And so I said, hey, man, tell me what's your deal? What beats inside of you? And he looks at me and he's like, well, man, my whole thing is reconciliation. And I'm like, well, that can't be, because that's my thing. So that kind of like kicked off things. T, what would you say?
Yeah, that was pretty much how it went, honestly. I mean, Sam Hart is like such a good man. I mean, great music producer, but also just like a good dude, and he knows good people. And so when he called me and told me, hey, like, my buddy Jon's coming, and like, he doesn't just collaborate with everybody. So if you would be down, I think you guys would connect like on a heart level and on a soul level. And maybe that's all we're going to do. Maybe we're going to just connect and have a great time and talk about the things that God's put on your heart to do, or maybe we'll get a cool song out of it. And so, yeah, like Jon said, like, you and I went back and forth for a while about just the different way reconciliations played a role in our history, as related to the ethnicity, like the countries that we come from, and then also skin color. And so we were just talking back and forth, and I think the song kind of like found us. I mean, like, it sounds kind of cheesy to say, but I think there was such a kindredness between Jon and I, and just wanting reconciliation to happen, especially in light of what's been happening in our country over the last, since 2020. I mean, like the last 3 years, like just the racial tensions being so high. And for me, just wanting to really step into that space and more intentionally, and Jon already being in that space, and us both being like, you know what, the healing that the world needs, the unity that the world needs, actually isn't found in a book, isn't found in a philosopher, it's found in Jesus. And Jesus is the Prince of Peace, and like allowing the peace of Jesus to reign in our hearts. And what would it even look like for us to be carrying that peace into the world as Christians? And all of a sudden, Symphony of Peace. That kind of sped the story up, Jon, but I'm like, that's kind of where it was.
It's so true. And I gotta say, we were doing an interview a couple of months ago with CCM magazine, and this similar thing happened, where it's like God will connect sovereign pieces and sovereign friends at sovereign times. And I literally found myself getting to know my new friend while he was talking. But God had taken decades to create him, decades to create me. None of us are finished products, but I could see calling coming out of him. It was almost like we were finishing each other's sentences. And the same thing is true here now. But if you rewind the tape to that songwriting session, we didn't know any of that. We just started leaning into whatever God was preparing. And 3 hours into it, we were looking at each other like, what just came out? And I should tell you that my own daughter's name is Symphony. And in a year of incredible personal cost, the Lord was like writing a symphony of peace before I even realized it. And as a psalmist, I like to use that word, musician for God, not just for me. And on his mission, one of the things I've had that I always love to do is lay scripture in song. Well, because heaven and earth will pass away, but his word will never pass away. Well, we dropped in those red letters where Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers," like T was saying, for they will be called the children of God. Everybody doesn't get to be called children of God. Yes, he made the whole earth. Yes, his glory will cover the earth like the waters to the sea. But it doesn't mean that everybody is children of God. But the peacemakers, they are not only they are blessed, but they are the ones who literally have this like little seal that says children of God. And in a time when our world is losing our ever-loving mind, and we default to war, division, at each other's throats at any opportunity, we don't just stumble into it, we like look for it. And then we expand technologically with platforms of social media and communication, and it actually only exposes our fragility. It doesn't protect us. Not that it doesn't have merit, but it only exposes what's not stable in the inside. So we are at each other's throats in the racial wars of 2020, or being the precious thing is we both in our lineage know deep loss. So I'm Armenian. So I have 1,700 years of Christianity in my bloodline, but my grandparents fled for their lives from the Armenian genocide. And Temitope can talk about the tribal wars that he's known with his dad and in just growing up in Nigeria. And the reality is, one of the things I said, I'll quote T because I loved it. He said something like, "Hate has no preference." And then we just said, yeah, it just burns everything to the ground. Hate has no bias. It just, everything burns. And that's its bias, is it doesn't stop until everything's dead. And I can remember a moment, I'm half Armenian, half German Mennonite. So the crazy thing is, to be very honestly with you, I feel like I'm watching faithfulness of generations inside coming out of me that I didn't understand, because the Mennonites have this peacemaking mantle. And for whatever reason, God keeps birthing these songs of peace. 2 years before that, it was a song we wrote with Aaron Schuss and Sam Hart called Shalom in the middle of the racial riots. A couple years before that, it was a song called Reconciliation Song I wrote with a world-class violist who I found out was a Turk after I hugged him. And we dropped that on the 100th year of the Armenian genocide. So I'm like, Father, what are you doing? But clearly it comes back to those red words in Matthew 5:9, where Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they'll be called children of God." And the sacred thing about music is it's like the neosporin of the soul, right? You couldn't go places. You can't just come out and say, "Hey guys, let's all just be friends," when there's splatter all over the ground, because loss is real. But the Lord will use beautiful gifts like music and serenade and woo the heart into places you never would go naturally. And it's like the neosporin. And pretty soon you start getting his heart.
Absolutely. And it's what a great experience, not only to have had this song come out of that connection, but I don't think I had realized that that was your first connection either. And to have just that, not only understanding and knowing of each other kind of flow out from that song as well. It must have been very impactful to be a part of, and to kind of see happening as it went.
No doubt.
Yep. Music is one of those like innately unifying factors anyway. I mean, you can get an agnostic, a Muslim, a Christian, gay person, white supremacist, the Black Lives Matter. You can get all of these people that otherwise outside of a room would hate each other and probably want to kill each other, but they all come together because they just love John Mayer, or they love Taylor Swift, or they love whoever, you know? And so I think for Jon and I both, we both feel that there's a burden, I think, that we carry as far as like, hey, if music's going to be a unifying piece anyway, we want people to be unified around the truth. We want people to be unified around things of healing. Like, yes, write songs about your relationships, write songs about things you've gone through in life. Absolutely. Like, do all those things, but also let's have these songs that are going to use the power of music to naturally unify, to also preach and speak unity into groups of people in specific rooms. Like you said, like for my dad, you know, the racial tension in terms of like separation and hate based off of color doesn't make a ton of sense, because where he grew up, it was all tribalism. So he's like, I don't understand why people don't get along, because, hey, put that down, please. Sorry, I'm also parenting at the same time. But he's like, people of the same color, like, we don't even get along. And so, hey, please don't play with that. So we are trying to like help my dad understand, you know, and help people understand, like Jon said, hey, hate knows no color, hate knows no religion, hate knows no gender. Hate just is going to take everything and burn it completely to the ground. And so this idea of peace being something that we could sing and translating across so many different areas, I think is what makes the song so powerful. And we didn't go, I think, Jon, we didn't like go into it thinking we were going to write that. I think we went in thinking, hey, we're going to hang out and we're going to be friends. And God just had other plans.
Oh, that is so great. And I'm curious now, the song, the track has been out there for a bit. I'm curious how the listener impact and how listeners have taken in the message and how they've perhaps portrayed their love, or how they've impacted, the song has impacted them back to you both, how that has either like deepened the meaning of the song, or how it's just taken on a different meaning for each of you in that way.
Yeah, seeing it touch hearts is the whole point. Do you know what I mean? You're either like, artists are either, and it's been a pendulum in my own journey. I'll speak for myself, right? You go as a human who's vulnerable and needing love. And if you're an artist, you create and people respond to that if you don't suck, you know? And then the vulnerability is that you find your identity based on people's love, right? So you create and like, what do you think? And then I matter. The problem is that's missing the whole point of God's mission. When you drink in who, and when you start learning who and whose you are, then you get to create. I feel like artisans, then we can transcend a little bit higher to, I get to just create and try to serve culture. Now, I haven't all arrived, but these are the things that I'm learning, you know, and Acts 13:36 says, King David served his generation and then he died. Can you imagine like having that on your tombstone? You didn't just say, he made a ton of records that were super impact and everybody loved it and bought it and consumed it, but the whole time he was just needing validation. What if you could have transcended because, one of the scriptures we teach our psalmists is 1 John 3:1, see what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. And that is what we are. And I make them say exclamation point, you know? and so when you can drink that in, then you get to create and serve and try to inspire rather than just need. But hearing the testimonies coming in of how it's touching hearts. Just the other day, someone was just messaging me like, thank you so much for the song. I mean, this person wasn't even on my radar, you know, for the music you keep releasing, like it was touching me so deeply in my time of sorrow. And it was, you know, when your heart, when people are so, they put it out there so much, the only thing you can say, oh my gosh, is, you know, I'd love to process some of that with you. And then they began to, right? But we are in so many places of fragility right now. The human soul, we would say, is not super healthy, and the reality is, and yet there still is a good God. And so touching that has been really special to see. And then we know that there are so many stories you don't hear,
Yeah, I think the stories will continue to come. And I mean, and honestly, we didn't necessarily write it we hoped it would impact, but we didn't write it for impact, if that makes sense. Like, I think Jon and I both were like, hey, this is just something that we feel like we need to say and do and be obedient in a moment. And whatever God decides to do with it, like, great. But we don't need it to like stream a certain amount. We don't need to hear a certain amount of stories. We don't need for a bunch of different things to happen for us to have impact. We just needed to say yes. And it's an encouragement to hear that it resonates with people, but we didn't need it to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and for that track, which changes, project to project, the success for both of you was the fact that, to your point, you said yes, you created it, versus, in some other times there's different definition of success, if you will.
But I think it is always, I love that T said just about obedience in the moment, because God's already written the story. So doing your part and then caring about people, loving God and loving people, to me, that is always the motivating factor. And as Temitope was sharing, and you guys were both processing, I was thinking this healing process that happens. I was thinking about a moment I had with my son several years ago, when I had, without being intentional, I had brought him to a gathering with Armenians and Turks after several years of reconciliation work with which people should be my enemies. And by the end, we literally led worship in Turkish and in English, which was crazy. And then by the end, this prayer time gathered around, and everybody started praying. Well, my son was only like 9 at the time, and all of a sudden there was a pause in the prayer circle, and my son starts praying, and he was like, God, thank you so much that you brought us here, and it's, oh my gosh, I'm teaching my son to bless instead of curse. And if you know much about genocide cultures, we hold on to our pain like a badge of honor. No way around it. And but nothing should be forgotten inappropriately. But Jesus said, blessed are the merciful, for they will. He was saying, like, hate has no bias. It just burns everything to the ground. I could have either passed that on, and then obviously on my daughter's side, the personal note that God, in the middle of this, all of a shaking time in my own life, shaking culture, he would literally put her name in it, Symphony of Peace. And you're seeing, like, man, not only are we creating music, and not only is T my bro, but like, we're talking generationally behind, but God sees. And if anything, if artists can lead in such a way, we don't just say, hey, check out my song, check out my blog. You can say, follow me as I follow Christ. Hopefully we have served the culture a little better, but we know our little homies will be standing on our shoulders. So.
For sure. And we're getting close to time, so I do want to wrap, but I do want to have one final question. I'm just curious, is there any plans for future work between the two of you? And if so, or in addition, what are each of you up to right now?
For sure. T, why don't you jump in there? He's getting super important, I'll tell you that, guys.
Jon is like my brother for life. So it's like, we'll probably collaborate on something at some point, which is exciting. But yeah, no, I think for me, I'm working on a new record, which I'm really excited about, and getting to collaborate with a bunch of different church communities, just as they're invited in to write songs and be a part of their projects. But I'm really, really excited about this record I've been sitting on. That's kind of almost like a continuation of what Jon and I started with Symphony of Peace. which is honestly just like, I think, a continuation of our stories of just like, okay, God, like, as we continue moving towards you and reflecting your heart in the way that you've designed us to. And for me and Jon, it's unity, it's belonging, it's reconciliation. This next record is just like the next phase of me recognizing how much reconciliation affects every part of my life. Because the reality is, it's like Jon and I wrote in the song, like, blessed are the peacemakers, like he said, that's the one title he's given to children of God. So if the world isn't at peace and the world isn't reconciled, that we don't look at the world and point and go, what's the problem? We look at ourselves and go, hey, are we at peace? Are we reconciled? Are we peacemaking amongst ourselves? Because it starts with us and then goes out to the world, right? And so this record I'm working on is like a continuation of that, and I'm very excited about it. And I'm very excited for whatever Jon and I end up doing next, which will be great.
Well, I highly endorse my brother Temitope. Guys, check out anything that comes out with him. I still remember when we were just coming up, we had just tracked his vocals on Symphony of Peace, and I think a couple of days later, he's like, "Yeah, bro, it's crazy. I just got signed by Capitol," and I was like, well, that's awesome. And it's just the grace that God continues to do. We didn't, none of that was part of the plan, but as we were, cooking and to his point, it is fun to create with friends. When we collab, or even as he continued to go, it's so special. I got another Browner brother who's waving the banner, not only of Jesus, but also the ministry of reconciliation. So no, it's special. I actually just came back from Amsterdam, a global gathering with 130 nations represented, thousands of leaders. Honored to be able to lead some worship and be even assemble as something kind of gathering. And when it was around one purpose, is called Empower 21, is around one purpose. The conference calls everyone. It was so mobilizing global leaders from across the world, so that every human hears the gospel within the in the next 10 years, marking the 2000th year of Jesus being crucified. And I thought to myself, how the heck did I get here? It was like the Lord assembled the Avengers and somehow was sitting at the table. This is craziness. But you know what?
It's because you're an Avenger. That's why. It's just what it is, bro.
You're so kind, man. I am so humbled to do that with my bride and to be a part. And I'm sitting there, and Rick Warren's right in front of me, Bill Johnson's right next. I mean, and God was assembling all these, but it was around one purpose. It wasn't about any name, any organization. And so, even not only working on new music, I love to share, but just this movement of I feel like when God gave me had me start Psalmist Mission, I feel like that word crystallized the thing I didn't understand I was carrying for like 20 years, which is like T was saying, in every version, we just keep creating in the same direction. And I just pray that I would be a psalmist on mission and raise an army of others who keep doing that we're serving our generation, keeping it from hurting so bad, and stabilizing in a time of darkness. I am just diving in with Sam Hart on another track with a Grammy producer named Stephen V. Taylor on this really exciting song called Adonai, Deliverance Song, that you guys can keep your eye out for. I think it may bring some freedom. She's got an incredible social media platform, and she'll just go live and bring a freedom to folks. And I love, when darkness is getting crazy, God's raising up some of those bright lights that are getting even crazier too. So that's what's fun, to collide with bros like Temitope, these gatherings in Amsterdam, other leaders who are leveraging their life for God. I literally, one of my homies that I met out there, leaders from like every continent now are praying into collabs, but one guy, he was Korean, his organization is literally called Billion Soul Harvest. Like, what kind of people, talk like that? That wasn't the name of your organization. It's Billion Soul Harvest. And by the time we had lunch, he was like, yeah, we're pretty confident it's going to be an easy mark to hit. I'm like, who are these guys? So anyways, hopefully the music creation can be a part of, quite frankly, touching broken hearts in a shaking time and preparing Jesus' soon coming return. So
Absolutely. I've really enjoyed getting to chat with you both today. I just appreciate you taking the time and sharing more of your heart and your story behind the music that you create.
So cool, Jesse. Thank you so much for the time. We appreciate it diving in with Beat Christian Beat and just being able to collab,